Talofa lava, this is Pacific Waves from RNZ Pacific. I'm Susana Suisuki. Coming up.
This is one of the worst instances of killings that I've seen in the last 10 years.
More than 50 lives lost in what's been described as PNG's worst massacre in the last decade. Also, the New Zealand Salvation Army releases its 17th State of the Nation report. And later,
this country has a very proud competitive history, qualifying for the FIFA Futsal World Cup.
Australia's futsal team arrive in Solomon Islands, hoping to spark more interest in the game. The death toll in what's been described as Papua New Guinea's worst massacre in the last decade is expected to climb, with more than 50 deaths already recorded. Acting Police Commander for Inga, Patrick Becker, told Lydia Lewis that the ongoing tribal fighting resulted in the deaths. He says it's a very serious situation.
We are still conducting a search to retrieve body people killed in the battlefield. Yesterday we collected 26 bodies.
And for more on this, Lydia spoke with our PNG correspondent Scott Waide. She began by asking him how he would describe the incident.
This is one of the worst instances of killings that I've seen in the last 10 years. The last one that I saw previously was the one in the southern, in the Ela province, where 16 women and one child were killed. And that was when I went there personally to see it. This one, the number is very high. I haven't seen that kind of number in the last 10 years. Collectively, the number will be higher. But for 52 in one instance, very high.
And who have you spoken with on the ground? I understand you've spoken with one tribesman who was involved so far. Who else have you spoken with, and what did they say?
Yeah, I've spoken to one tribesman whose family is involved in the fighting. And he told me that 25 dead bodies were retrieved from the bushes yesterday, late in the afternoon, with help from police and military. And 27 more were recovered this morning. They've taken the bodies to Wabeg. And in terms of the number of women and children affected, there's no accurate figure to say how many women and children have been affected by it, but the number will be higher, as is usually the case. So the number of men whose bodies were retrieved is 52. As of this morning.
And what do we know about the women and children?
Yeah, they're obviously affected. There's very little information at the moment that I'm able to gather at the moment, because a lot of the focus is on the men who have been fighting and who've been killed. Have
any of the men been taken into custody? What is the process after such a horrific incident like this? Yeah,
from the police front, it's really difficult to have people arrested in situations like this. And from my experience over the last 20 years, it has always been difficult to go into tribal fighting areas and have the community give up the people who are actually responsible for the killings. Because if you arrest on one side, you have to arrest on the other side as well. And given the fact that a lot of the tribesmen are armed, it's a really difficult situation for police and military to try to contain the situation firstly, and then have those people arrested. Usually, the process has been to involve political leaders who will be involved in the negotiation, or community leaders, church elders, and then seek the voluntary surrender of people who are involved in the killings and in the violence generally.
Do you know more about what weapons were involved? There's been talk around them being homemade.
Most of the weapons used in the killings are military weapons. They and the names they mentioned to me was Israeli-made Galils, US-made M16s, SLRs, One bullet for an M16 is being sold for 30 kina, depending on the demand. It can go up to 50 kina for one bullet. A shotgun was also used, as I'm being told, and one shotgun shell costs about 75 kina for one. So there's a huge black market attached to this tribal fighting that's happening. One assault rifle costs upwards of 30,000 kina. So it's a very complex web of people who benefit from this tribal fighting as well.
And all of this is on the backdrop of instability in government, with an upcoming motion of no confidence in the Prime Minister. But what does this mean in the grand scheme of things, with this political instability and obviously the riots that happened at the start of the year?
This will definitely be used as a point of contention by the opposition, because as is usually the case, any violence in the Highlands, any violence in any parts of the country leading towards the vote of no confidence is always used as ammunition to take on the government by the opposition or any other parties who has disagreements with the ruling government. So that's definitely going to be something of discussion on the floor of Parliament during the vote of no confidence session, if it comes to fruition.
And we've already seen lots of discussion about the lack of employment. Is this something that comes into play in a situation like this as well?
Yeah, the provincial police commander has stated very quite clearly in a statement that a lot of the people who were killed in this violent incident were people who were hired to kill. So that's from the police, and it's no secret that people have offered their services as, quote, mercenaries in tribal fighting, and that's also we've seen that in the elections where people like that were used in intimidation, and it's a sad situation, an unfortunate turn of events, and it's escalating by the year.
And as simply as you can put it, why did this break out, or how did this escalation ensue?
Yeah, it's difficult to summarize it in a few words, but it's there's been a long-standing feud between different clans, and it's trying to get to the bottom of it is you'd have to weave through the complexities of tribal politics and violence that has happened in the past. Last year, as with this case, the person I spoke to said that this was related to an incident last year, and the incident last year would have been related to something that happened previously. So it's an ongoing cycle of violence that is really, really difficult to stop within the communities.
As the Western world looks on and sees the headline of massacre in Papua New Guinea, what do people on the ground want the world to know in a situation like this?
Yeah, it's Papua New Guinea is a complex country, and as you know, we've got 800 languages. We've got a myriad of different cultures. The Enga province is just one province, and my culture, for myself, totally different from Engan culture. So to have all of the cultures in Papua New Guinea, lumped into one, and to describe Papua New Guinea as a violent country is quite unfair. That's first thing I'd like to say. The other thing is within Enga itself, the manner in which there are systems of governance, traditional governance within the Enga province and within the tribes and clans that contribute to this fighting. In order to understand the violence, one has to really go down to the ground and speak to the tribal leaders, speak to those who are involved in it, to understand the rationale behind the killings, and then work backwards from there in order to have a clear understanding of what's happening on the ground and who's affected and why they're actually doing it. There are, modern elements at play, like modern weapons, military-type weapons that are used in the tribal fighting, along with traditional weapons. And that has put a new spin on, a new spin on the level of violence. The use of mercenaries is a new thing that we've seen in the last 20 years. So all of that put together adds to the complexity of the tribal violence, the tribal landscape that exists in the Yanga province.
The Federated States of Micronesia's president says the nation is barely hanging on because the compacts of free association have not yet been approved. The agreements grant the US military access to compact of free association nations, which are given financial assistance in return. Palau, Marshall Islands and the Federated States of Micronesia, in a letter penned to the United States Senate, says delays are causing uncertainty. FSM President Wesley Semina told Caleb Fotheringham there'll be economic and social instability if the compacts are not passed in time.
Well, our current situation right now is that we're barely hanging on, and that is simply because of the continuing resolutions that the United States Congress has adopted to continue a stream of funding for its own operation, which includes us, the FAS countries. So to that extent, we are grateful that we are still receiving funding, although the funding is not at the same level as that would be in our new agreement with the United States.
Last time you spoke with RNZ Pacific, you said FSM was starting to fall down a fiscal cliff. Have you fallen yet? What's the situation?
At this moment, because of the non-approval of our compact agreements, we are hanging on there. We are hanging on the cliff, but haven't fallen yet. But that we don't know. We're still depending on what the U.S. Congress will do in terms of providing funding to our governments. And in saying that, we are worried that the deadlines for those continuing resolutions, which are March 1st and March 8th, are approaching fast. And if the U.S. Congress cannot agree on providing further continuing resolution funding, then, of course, we will fall off the cliff. And that's what's worrisome to us right now. We're really worried that without approval of the compact to make our funding more permanent, then we are facing that fiscal cliff.
What would falling off this fiscal cliff look like?
Oh, it's I cannot even imagine what it would be like. I know it would be very disastrous to our operations because while our national government would be okay, our four states would depend largely on the compact funding, will not be able to sustain their operations. And that would create both economic and social instability, and not to mention political instability. And that's what's worrisome to leaders in our nation, that the lack of funding would create that kind of instability, especially in our four states, which make up our nation, our national government. So we are very much worried about that.
What are the main financial challenges the FSM faces right now?
Right now, of course, the challenge is in our revenue sources. As you know, about 70 or more % of our revenues for the four states come from the compact funding. And if that doesn't, if that's not continued, then of course we will have to find other means of financing our state's governments. And right now we're looking at all kinds of options on how to do that.
You were saying before that you were hoping that the compacts will be approved in March, obviously coming up pretty soon. Are you feeling confident that they will be approved?
Confident? Well, I'm not sure about confident, but I am hopeful. I am hopeful that the U.S. Congress will see the need for them to do their part in approving our compact agreements, because we have done our parts. We have approved it as required by our agreements, but we're now just waiting for the United States Congress to do its part, to approve it and provide the funding for our operations.
What would be your message to the U.S.?
Well, my message to U.S. is that we are a patient people, a patient government. We understand their process, but we hope they will also understand that they have just celebrated the second anniversary of their Indo-Pacific strategy, and we are very much part of that. So I hope they can be reminded that the FAS countries are just as much part of their Indo-Pacific strategy as other partners that they have in this region. So we would just ask that the U.S. Congress would continue its prioritization of the approval of the Compact of Free Association Agreements, so that we can have much more continuity, predictability, and in the stream of funding for our governments.
The New Zealand Salvation Army has released a 17th State of the Nation report. The report assesses social outcomes across the following areas: children and youth, work and incomes, housing, crime and punishments, and social hazards. Joining me is the report's co-author and the Salvation Army's social policy analyst, Ana Ika. Kia ora, Ana. The Salvation Army recently released its State of the Nation report. Can you talk me through about the report's theme, ngā tukunga iho, the things we inherit? Why was that chosen as the theme?
Yeah, well, the State of the Nation we released every year is kind of like a report card, and I guess our theme this year, ngā tukunga iho, was we were thinking about it as a benchmark for our new government, because ultimately the successes that have been highlighted in the report they can't claim, nor can they be discredited for, I guess, a lot of the failures, a lot of the areas that have been declining. And so the theme is the things we inherit is basically to show that this is the benchmark that our government will be working from, and also just to highlight some of the areas that have improved, that we would build upon them, and the areas that have been declining, that we would work together to be able to address those areas.
It's interesting that you brought up the new government, and I'll come back to you later on. But what does this report tell us about Pacific communities in Aotearoa? Are things improving?
Yeah, it's a generalised overview of the whole country, but we have highlighted disparities that occur in specific communities, particularly with Māori and with Pasifika. One of the areas that is of concern and has been, I guess, for the past 5 years, is that when we're looking at child poverty, that has declined over the past, since 2018, when we first started measuring it. However, when we're looking at Pasifika children, it hasn't improved for Pasifika children as much as it has for other ethnic groups, and that's really concerning given that we have such a young population. If you break it down and you're looking at all the ethnic groups that they measure in regards to child poverty, everyone has improved in regards to children living in material hardship, whereas if we look at Pasifika children, the number of Pasifika children in material hardship has actually increased, and so that's really concerning. So material hardship is like going without a doctor's visit or a dentist visit, or going without nutritious food, or not being able to afford clothing. So those basic necessities that's needed just for everyday living.
And why do you think material hardship for Pasifika people, why has that gotten worse?
I think it's an array of reasons. I think one of the reasons is we're not employed in areas that often bring in high incomes. Incomes have increased in general, but to keep up with inflation, it hasn't kept up enough. And so I think that's one of the concerns, is that our Pasifika communities are just not employed in areas where we're getting paid adequately. If we're going to talk about the pay. We also look in one of the chapters, working incomes, around gender equity and the gender pay equity in particular. And so one of the areas there is for a male, the median hourly wage there is $33, but the lowest paid, group that we looked at is actually Pasifika women, and our median hourly rate is about $28. So that's a significant difference between the median for males in general. For Māori wahine, it's about $28 and I think 10 cents. And so, and so that just highlights, I guess, the inequities there in regards to income when it comes to our Pasifika families and being able to provide adequate, financial support to meet material needs for our families that a lot of Pasifika communities do face.
With these reports, do you feel like a broken record sometimes? It must be frustrating having to explain the stats and talk about hardships.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a bit of a broken record, but, the squeaky wheel gets the oil, and so if we don't continue to highlight these challenges and continue to highlight these issues, then nothing will be done about them. And I know it's quite disheartening every time we show up with another report that's always negative, but we need to continue to push the challenges to the forefront so that something can be done about it, because the Salvation Army is a social service, so we often do see the challenges and issues before data is released or before the data shows the picture. So these numbers mean a lot more to us, that, their names and their faces and their families and communities that come through our doors every day. And so it's important for us not to just be the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, but to be able to push some changes at the top so that our families aren't falling into, I guess, the desperate numbers that we report on in the state of the nation.
Now, earlier on, you mentioned that the report is a benchmark for the current government. So how confident are you that this government will be able to turn things around? I do recall in our last interview that you weren't particularly impressed with the National Party proposing sanctions for the beneficiaries.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've tried to highlight in this report is areas that have improved. And if I can look at Māori wellbeing, just to highlight this, when we're looking at Māori rangatahi in kura kaupapas or te reo Māori schools, they perform at the same level as the rest of the mainstream schools. Whereas if you're looking at rangatahi Māori in state schools, there's a significant disparity there. So I guess what we're trying to highlight with this report is that there are things that have improved, and how do we build on that? How do we replicate those? And a lot of what we're trying to highlight is that not everyone fits the same mold, and so there needs to be alternative approaches. And I guess when I spoke to you last time around the elections and the campaigns, was that they were providing a really oversimplified solution to try and address a really complex problem. And I guess that's why we're trying to highlight that there are alternative approaches that meet different community needs. And if we work on those, then we'll be able to lift everyone out of the hardships that we're seeing on the front lines, as opposed to just, trying to provide a one-stop shop to be able to address everybody. Then that doesn't work, and we know that doesn't work. So there needs to be, I guess, a myriad of solutions to be able to address, the communities that are most at risk, which is often our Pasifika communities and our Māori communities.
The Australia Futsaroos are touring the Solomon Islands the next 9 days. While their main target is to have some much-needed games before they compete at the Asian Confederation Cup, they also hope they can ignite more interest in the next generation of futsal players in the Solomon Islands. The two sides are booked for 3 test matches, the second time they'll be competing against each other, following last year's 2-1 win record for the Futsaroos. Elisa Tora has the story.
Kieran Lilly, Football Australia's General Manager, Strategic Projects and International Partnerships, says the Honiara visit is exciting for them.
And we're here in Honiara as part of the Pacific Oz Sports Futsal Series, an initiative that's supported by the Australian Government through Pacific Oz Sports. So this is a progression from a 3-match series that we had with the Solomon Islands Kuru in June, July of 2023. And now we've had an opportunity to come over to Honiara, play 3 matches against them.
Lily says they hope that young local fans in Honiara will get the time to watch the 3 matches and be inspired to take up the sport.
Maybe it's an opportunity to connect a little bit more directly with that moment and feel inspired. I know this country has a very proud competitive history, qualifying for FIFA Futsal World Cups, really pushing teams. They're very, very good competitors on the field. And so maybe this series can also help inspire the next generation of futsal players.
Futsal Rules head coach Miles Downey says the Kurukuru side has always been a tough opponent to play against.
So for our players to be tested before going into the Asian Cup qualifiers was essential, and off the back of that we were able to qualify for the Asian Cup. So for us, the Solomon's matches are always crucial to our preparation, and we'd love for this to be a regular thing each year.
Touring captain Shervin Adeli respects the Kurukuru players and believes the hosts are exciting opponents.
We had the 3 games back in Sydney, so yeah, looking forward to have another tough competition here in Solomon Island. Like I said, we've always had good games against them. They've got some really good players. You know, we expect a good match, and their style is exciting to watch and play against. So yeah, for us, we're looking for a good preparation for us leading into the Asian Cup.
The Kurukurus had held the futsal rules to a 1-1 draw on July 1, but lost 2 games, 3-2 and 5-3 respectively, in last year's Test series. Local Honiara futsal fans can watch the teams in action on February 21st, 23rd and the 25th at the Friendship Hall.
That's Pacific Waves for today. To listen back, head over to rnzi.com/programs. We're also on Spotify, Apple and iHeartRadio. From myself and the RNZ Pacific team, tō whāsui fua.